this page is basically a page of contrasts. It contrasts me, a woman who adores masculinity in men and who encourages my men to be manly and noble and heroic, with people like Loree McBride and my sister Sandra Metcalf, who hate masculinity and are basically narcissists. So the page opens up with the movie that I made called Brent Spiner's Rape, which describes how narcissist Loree McBride was raised by, I hate to say this, but the way they raised her, she was created in a cloning lab, and they used accelerated growth hormones to grow her into an adult. And all Loree McBride understands is what she learned from the Jesuit order. And Satan is in charge of the Jesuits, and he just uses them like objects, and where they're just like cogs in his plan. And for this reason, that's why people like Loree McBride came into existence. She was raised to believe that masculinity or men are to be manipulated by people like her, and that they don't have value in and of themselves, that they're only valuable when they're used and manipulated. And this actually stems out of a deep, deep feeling of inferiority that people like Loree McBride and my sister feel, which drives them to raging jealousy and narcissism. Deep down underneath Loree's boasting and um, her cruelty towards others is a feeling of deep inferiority that men could genuinely love me and they won't genuinely love her. She feels she is a narcissist. She's got a serious case of narcissistic personality disorder, as well as my sister. And in this website, I contrast two different women. Me, a woman who I actually have a lot of faith in myself. In spite of the fact that my mother criticized me, I think I always knew deep down underneath that I was special. I always knew this. And I didn't believe the lies my mother told me about men. When I was growing up, my mother always criticized the men in my life. My father, she always called him selfish and cold. And she said I was just like my father. And she kept saying over and over that I was mean and just like my father. And I think she actually got me to kind of rebel against her, because I felt like her criticism was so unfair. I mean, I believed what she said about my father, but I didn't like it, because she kept telling me I was just like my father. And she would always call my sister Sandra D, like cute, like the movie star, not selfish, like your sister Gail. And so my mother raised me to doubt myself. But I felt like her criticism of me was so unfair when I realized that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins. I embraced him wholeheartedly, and I just totally rejected just about everything my mother taught me. But my sister embraced what my mother taught her, and I think she believed the lies that my mother told her about. My mother is too critical of men. She had a great husband in my stepdad, but yet as wonderful as he was to her, she was always criticizing me to him behind his back. And I've always felt like she's not very fair, that she's a little bit too overly critical of other people. And my sister, unfortunately, believed my mother's lies and my mother's pride. And she developed, by accepting what the very unfair things my mother said about the masculine sex, about men, my sister has developed into a woman who uses men. And this all comes about because of a deep feeling of inferiority. So basically, you guys, The narcissistic personality disorder is usually somebody who has serious doubts about their worth and don't feel that anybody could love them for the way they really are. And I got to admit, it's it's partly Zach Knight and Rule 13 and the Jesuit order's fault that Loree came out the way she did. They raised her to believe that human beings are objects to be manipulated and that nobody has worth in and of themselves. So it's partly their fault, but I've forgiven them, and they understand now that they did wrong. And Zach Knight and Rule 13, they're actually trying to make things right. And even Zach growing up was abused. A lot of people become Jesuits because they grew up with cold, uncaring caretakers who made them believe that they don't have any worth if they are truth themselves, that nobody will love them the way they really are. So they artificially inflate themselves and try to make themselves feel valuable by using people. They feel like, it's a vicious cycle, the narcissistic personality disorder. They only feel worth when they're using people because it makes them feel more they're very sensitive to criticism because they have serious doubts about themselves, but they won't acknowledge this to themselves, and they project a sense of superiority, and they feel like they always have to use people to make themselves feel worthy. It's really sad because Loree McBride is a dangerous narcissist. She's a murderer, a rapist, and she's furious that Brent won't love her for who she is, but yet how can a man love her the way she is? She abuses people, and my sister's the same way. I hear she's been tying up her husband on a leash, and she keeps him locked up in her bedroom like a slave. He apparently likes it, so the only kind of guy a narcissistic woman can get is a cuck. A guy who has no manliness and is a cuck. Anyways, I rejected my mother's teachings, and she always criticized me for it. I rejected her value system where she felt like having social status and belonging to the rich society, and the super educated makes you superior to the uneducated people. And I rejected all that. I just felt like my mother was shallow and artificial, and I rejected that. My sister went along with it, and look what it's turned her into. She's a first-class narcissist. But my mother, she just can't acknowledge that the way she raised my sister has produced a criminal. You say, well, you didn't become a criminal. That's because when I was a child, I was resentful of my mother for being overly critical of me. And when I found out Jesus loved me just the way I am, and that he died on the cross for me, a sinner, I embraced Jesus at age 14, and I just went all out for him. And Jesus, through my own personal Bible study and through my Christian church, I was able to overcome a lot of the handicaps that I had growing up, where my mother was very critical of me. And I realized that she was utterly unfair. And but my sister embraced my mother's teachings, and I guess I just didn't think my mother was right. I felt like she was very unfair towards men, and my mother always criticizes men. And my sister apparently believed the lies that if somebody is a man, they tend to be inferior, and therefore they deserve to be controlled by a woman. So I rejected that. I felt like I knew my mother wasn't fair with me, so I figured she wasn't fair with the men either. So the sad thing is, though, is that I did sustain some damage. Anyways, when you go through my webpage, you will see that by rejecting how my mother raised me, I wasn't raised in a Christian home, and by embracing the Bible and Christian teaching, I ended up becoming like Esther. Esther was an orphan, so I felt kind of like an orphan because my mother never really accepted me the way I am, and I rebelled against that and became a Christian on fire for Jesus. But Jesus did have to put me in a marriage with an abuser to make me realize that that a man could love me the way I am. I put on airs in my 20s and I wasn't totally myself. I had some inferiority complex. I wasn't a narcissist. I was just very shy and very insecure that any man could love me the way I am. So when Brent Spiner did, it just revolutionized my life, and I adored him. So, see, the difference between me and Loree McBride and my sister is that I always believe deep down inside that every human being is capable of greatness. And I rejected my mother's teaching that the male sex is inferior to the female sex, which I think is something she really believes deep down underneath. And my sister has bought into that, and it's turned her into a narcissist. Loree McBride apparently believes the male sex is inferior to the female sex too, because of how the Jesuits raised her to believe that men are objects to be abused and raped. And so she's furious at people like Zach Knight, who created her in a cloning lab, and she feels like, well, you raised me to believe that men are objects, and you expect me now to embrace your new Jesuit order where we treat men with respect when you created me to abuse a man and get him to. So you see, she's a confused mess. Loree and my sister are so basically insecure about their worth that they have embraced this false view of themselves as being so superior. They feel like they have to be so much better than everybody else to make themselves feel worthy, because they were basically raised in, they've been taught all these lies. They just don't believe they can be themselves. So here I am, a woman who has accepted myself, believes that I have greatness in me, and believes that true love is possible. I don't think Loree and my sister believe true love is possible. So they've settled for garbage, thinking that they have to manipulate and control people because they don't have faith in themselves. They don't believe that anybody would love them for the way they really are, and they're afraid to find out who they are because they're narcissists. Well, they have a lot of ugly traits, but a narcissist cannot make themselves vulnerable. See, I allowed myself to be vulnerable with Brent, and he fell in love with me, and I fell in love with him, and we're both great people. Jealousy is not an issue with either one of us, really. We're both great. So basically, this whole page is about a narcissist versus a woman who's like Esther in the Bible. And I made a movie about Loree McBride's narcissism and how she almost devastated Brent Spiner, but Brent had a great woman in his life. That was me. I'm his Esther. And they actually, Frank O'Neill and Brent Spiner were actually behind a movie called Esther to glorify me as the woman who I always believed in true love. I found it in Jesus Christ. And knowing Jesus had it, I knew it had to exist on earth, and I found it. See, the problem is I have faith in Jesus, and my sister and Loree don't. And you can see the contrast. You just go through this page, and I shared my faith in Jesus with Brent Spiner. He fell in love with me by me singing Christian hymns. See, the main difference between me and Loree is I have faith in love and in Jesus, and she does not. She actually meets with Satan. Satan and Loree are driven by their egos, and they're both miserable, because nobody You can't find happiness in life by being absorbed with yourself. You find it when you lose yourself in others.